It was the first frost of November when the sound of a jackhammer broke the stillness of Cypress Lane. A sleepy suburb in southern Missouri, the street was a cul-de-sac of nearly identical homes, most built in the early 90s, vinyl siding mailboxes with hand-painted numbers and backyards that faded into a thin line of pine trees. Number 42 belonged to the Duvals. White trim maroon shutters. For years no one thought much of them. Mara Duval was a dental hygienist, and her husband Henry worked at the local hardware store. They had a daughter Emily who left for college and never came back. But on that cold morning it wasn't Henry operating the jackhammer. It was a team from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, and they had a warrant. A tip had come in anonymously. One sentence checked the Duvals' backyard. Look near the old maple tree. Mara sat on the front steps wrapped in a flannel blanket. Her face was pale, lips drawn tight. "We didn't do anything," she told a deputy. "This is a mistake." The dig began at 9:14 a.m. They worked methodically, measuring, photographing. A tarp was laid out to catch the displaced earth. Neighbours watched from behind their curtains, whispering to one another as the news vans rolled in. At 2:27 p.m, shovels hit something solid. The mood shifted instantly. A low whistle came from one of the deputies. "We got something." What they uncovered wasn't a body. It was a metal lockbox, rusted but intact. They lifted it out, set it on the tarp, and opened it under the eye of the crime scene photographer. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Some curled at the edges, some stuck together with age. They were of children, unnamed, all black and white, some smiling, some not. But there was something else. A pair of baby shoes, tiny red and still flecked with dried mud. A hush fell over the yard. The next day, Sheriff Caleb Marks held a press conference. At this time, we are not confirming whether the items found are linked to any open cases. We are treating this as a potentially historic discovery. Behind the cameras, Henry Duval was being handcuffed. He didn't resist, just looked straight ahead, jaw-clenched eyes hollow. Reporters screamed questions. "Mr. Duval, do you know these children? Why were those items buried on your property?" He said nothing. That night, forensic experts began to catalogue the contents of the box. One photograph had a name scribbled on the back Maribel. Summer 77. The local police ran it through their database. A match hit within hours. Maribel Stanton, age 6. Reported missing in July 1977 from Montgomery, just 2 towns over. Case unsolved. Mara sat in the dark kitchen, hands around a cold cup of tea, whispering to herself. "He wasn't even here in 77, she kept saying. "He wasn't even here." The sheriff's office announced a full excavation of the Duvals' backyard the next morning. By noon, the dogs had hit on another location farther back near the edge of the pine trees. That patch of ground felt different. Quieter. The earth was disturbed. They began to dig again. The news trucks returned. As dusk fell, floodlights were set up. The dig continued into the night. At 8:13 p.m. they found bones. Tiny, human, wrapped in what looked like a child's yellow sweater, now rotted through with time. Mara screamed when they told her. Loud enough the neighbours down the street heard it. Henry was still in holding, refused to speak. No lawyer, no calls. But when they brought the sweater into the evidence room, Sheriff Marks noticed something. The tag was missing, ripped out. That suggested intent. That suggested knowledge. And something else, a single stitch of pink embroidery almost invisible, still clung to the collar. The letters EM. Sheriff Marks went pale. Because EM wasn't Maribel Stanton. EM were the initials of another child, Emily Marie Duval. The daughter. The one who supposedly went off to college, but had never returned. Not for holidays, not for birthdays. And now someone was asking, was Emily ever enrolled at the University of Kansas? No record, no student ID, no tuition paid. Her last public trace was a senior yearbook photo from Jackson High class of 2011. Then nothing. Just gone. Mara stared at the photo the sheriff laid before her of the decaying sweater with the initials no one could ignore. She didn't cry. Her voice came low and strange, like she was listening to it from somewhere outside herself. "I told him she was gone," she said. "But not like this. Not like this." Then she looked straight at Sheriff Marks. "You're digging in the wrong backyard." And her voice cracked. "They got the wrong house." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She stood up slowly, trembling, then whispered, "Emily never disappeared from here." She pointed out the window past the fence into the shadows beyond. She disappeared from there. She was pointing at the neighbour's yard. Number 44, the house of their quiet, reclusive neighbour Carl Benedict. And no one had seen Carl in almost 4 years. Carl Benedict's house sat in silence. No porch light, no movement behind the windows. Just dead leaves piled against the siding and a sagging welcome mat that read, Home is where the heart is. The home inspector's record showed no electricity usage in the last 31 months. Mail had stopped piling up as if someone had deliberately filed a hold. Sheriff Marks stood at the edge of the Duval's yard, squinting through the pine trees toward number 44. He motioned for Deputy Allen. "Get a warrant," he said. "We're going in." Mara sat in the back of the patrol car blanket, pulled tight over her shoulders. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the onboard recorder. "I never trusted him. Not from the beginning. But Henry, he said Carl was just peculiar. You know how people are around here. Quiet men don't raise alarms, they just fade into the scenery." She looked out the window, her face folded in on itself. Emily used to babysit for him, once, just once. The warrant was signed by midnight. By 2:11 a.m. the deputies breached the front door. No resistance. The hinges groaned, the frame splintered. The smell hit them first. Old rot. Not just the stale kind that comes from abandonment, but something sweeter, rancid, organic. They moved in slowly. Lights sweeping over yellowing wallpaper, overturned furniture, a flickering TV still plugged into static. The kitchen was immaculate. Too immaculate. A fresh carton of milk in the fridge unopened. Still cold. Deputy Allen opened a drawer. Inside, 3 Polaroids. All of a teenage girl seated at a table, hair pulled back, eyes wide, unreadable. One photo had a date in the corner. July 15th, 2011. Emily Duval disappeared July 16th, 2011. Marks whispered, "Jesus Christ." In the basement, the air turned damp. The stairs creaked under their boots. One of the deputies gagged from the smell. Along the far wall were shelves, rows of dusty mason jars. Not food, just labels, names. Some written in Sharpie, some in faded ink. Jenny, Alessi, Amaya. And then one centre shelf placed like it mattered more. Emily? But it wasn't a full name. It was just the label. The jar was empty. Beside it a smaller box, locked. Marks didn't wait. He pried it open with a crowbar. Inside hair, braided long, pale brown, tied with a ribbon, and underneath a driver's license. Issued to Emily Marie Duval. Issued July 10, 2011. Never used. They found a hidden door beneath the stairs. The wood panelling was subtle, sealed at the edges with silicone. A vent fan above it still hummed faintly, pulling air through. Marks ordered the panel opened. The room beyond was soundproofed. Egg crates, insulation, one cot, one chair bolted to the floor. No windows, and in the centre of the wall a painted heart. Inside the heart written in red marker, "My sweet girl." There were scratch marks on the inside of the door, fingernails embedded in the frame. Someone had tried to claw their way out, but there was no one there now. No body, no blood, just a chain cut clean at the base. Back upstairs, the team catalogued everything. DNA would take weeks, but the local lab ran a rapid test on a brush found in the bathroom. It matched Mara Duval's mitochondrial DNA, proof Emily had been in that house. Sheriff Marks confronted Henry the next morning. "You told us Emily left for college, that she wrote, called, sent gifts." Henry didn't lift his head. "She did." "No, Henry, she didn't." Marks slammed the photos on the table. "This is the last image of your daughter alive, in your neighbour's kitchen." Henry stared at it. His lip trembled. "I never saw that photo before. Why would your daughter be inside Carl Benedict's house?" Silence. "Why would her driver's license and hair be in his basement?" Henry finally looked up, and what he said next chilled the entire room. I knew something was wrong. That night, she came home shaking. Said he asked her weird questions during babysitting, asked about her parents, about blood types, about a cycle. Marks blinked. "You didn't call the police?" "She begged me not to. Said she'd handle it. Said she'd never go back. But she did go back." Henry clenched his fists, not willingly. He paused, then said slowly, "Carl Benedict used to be a doctor." The files confirmed it. Carl Benedict, MD, medical license revoked in 1998. Psychiatric misconduct, multiple complaints, none criminal, none proven. He disappeared from the medical scene shortly after. Moved to Cypress Lane in 2003. Laid low. Kept to himself. The house was now fully under forensic lockdown, but something still didn't add up. Emily had vanished in 2011. The bones found in the Duval's yard were not hers. Lab results were in. The remains were of a young girl aged 7 to 9. Estimated death sometime around 1982. Not Maribel Stanton, not Emily. A third girl. Unknown. Mark stared at the evidence board. 3 missing girls, 3 sets of photos, 3 yards, and then it hit him. Carl Benedict didn't own number 44. He was renting it. The property deeds showed something no one had noticed before. In 2005, the house was purchased. by Henry Duval, under a different name, an alias Harold Vance. Henry had owned that house for nearly 2 decades, and he never told anyone. Sheriff Marks felt the floor beneath him tilt. They hadn't just dug in the wrong backyard. They were looking at the wrong monster. The morning fog rolled thick across Cypress Lane as investigators swarmed both properties. Number 42 and number 44, once ordinary homes, were now crime scenes, dissected by floodlights, police tape and cold suspicion. Sheriff Marks sat in his office, hands-laced eyes locked on the deed in front of him. The name Harold Vance had been neatly printed on the bottom of the 2005 property transfer for number 44. Fingerprints confirmed it. Harold Vance was Henry Duval. Marks leaned back slowly, voice barely a whisper. Why would you buy the house next door, under a false name? The timeline was falling apart. Mara Duval had insisted that Carl Benedict lived there, rented it, kept to himself. But now it was clear Henry owned the house, had owned it for years, and rented it, if that term could even apply to Carl. Mark stared at the bulletin board, now covered in overlapping photos, sticky notes, maps, receipts. 3 names circled in red: Emily Marie Duval, Maribel Stanton, unknown girl, remains Estiu 1982. All connected, but how? He returned to Mara. This time she didn't resist the questions. She looked broken, her voice a rasp, eyes rimmed with red. I didn't know about the house. He told me we were barely keeping up with our mortgage. We had to pull Emily out of dance because we couldn't afford it. All lies. Marks laid out the deed. Do you know who Carl Benedict really was? Mara shook her head. He just showed up one day. A pipe burst under the fence. Henry told me Carl was the landlord's guy. Said he'd take care of it. You never questioned why he was always around. I did. Her voice cracked. But Henry had this way of making me feel like I was the one losing it. Like I was too emotional, too paranoid. There was a pause. Then she added Emily was afraid of him. But I thought it was about Carl. I didn't realise until now it might have been about her father. Investigators dove into Carl Benedict's history. Former paediatric psychiatrist. Brilliant but erratic. Once worked at a psychiatric hospital in Chicago, until it was shuttered due to internal abuse allegations. Never convicted. Just disappeared into rural obscurity. Neighbours remembered him as polite, quiet, maybe too quiet, and always fixing things: pipes, lawnmowers, fences, including the one between his house and the Duvals. It was Deputy Allen who made the connection. He'd been reviewing aerial drone scans of the neighbourhood, trying to map out root structures around the Duvals' yard when he noticed it, an unnatural depression in the tree line just behind both properties. Not part of the original subdivision design. A shallow trench about 6 feet long. It didn't appear on any maps. No utility records. No landscaping requests. Just there. He marked it for a dig. The team arrived at first light. By noon they had unearthed a sealed plastic drum. Industrial grade. Buried under a layer of crushed rock and clay. Sheriff Marks stood at the edge watching as they hoisted it out of the ground. The drum was opened under strict evidence procedures. Inside clothing, decomposed fabric, a small pink backpack with unicorn patches, waterlogged notebooks, a rotted teddy bear with one glass eye, and bones. Small, human, dental records were rushed. 3 hours later, confirmation came. Maribel Stanton, missing since 1971, buried between the homes of Carl Benedict and Henry Duval. Marks felt the coldness spread through his chest like frostbite. They had found her, and now the question burned. Who put her there? Carl Benedict had the motive, the history, the home, but he didn't have the shovel. That night a woman named Gloria Stanton appeared outside the sheriff's department. 68. Fragile. Clutching an old black and white photo. My sister, she said, holding up the picture. You found her. They let her into a private room. She hadn't spoken about Maribel in decades, but now the memories spilled out like rain. She was sweet, loved puzzles, always ran barefoot. One day she went to the store. Mama gave her a nickel to buy a soda. She never came home. Sheriff Marks showed her the pink backpack. Gloria broke. That was hers. Mama sewed the unicorn on it herself. Then she looked up, voice shaking. There was a man back then, always lurking near the school. The other kids used to call him Dr. Worm. Said he talked real slow, like he was choosing each word. Marks leaned forward. Did anyone file a report? We did, she said. But nobody believed us. We were just poor folks from the edge of town. And that man, he was somebody. She took a deep breath. I saw him once, years later, not in town, on the news, background of a photo, some doctor giving a lecture at a hospital. I never forgot his face. She pointed at the wall at the bulletin board. That's him, right there, Carl Benedict. Marks nodded. Thank you, Gloria. You've helped more than you know. But still, one thing didn't sit right. Carl was smart. He moved. He covered tracks. He vanished when suspicion arose. So why would he bury a body in a shared tree line? Why so close? Unless someone else had a reason to keep her there. To watch the spot. To own it. To ensure it stayed hidden. That night, Deputy Allen got a hit on an old photograph. It was a faded shot of a 1982 4th of July neighbourhood barbecue. People smiling, kids with sparklers, and in the background, leaning against a tree, was Henry Duval. But that couldn't be. Henry Duval told them he moved to Missouri in 1989, that he met Mara in 91, that he only bought number 42 in 1994. But there he was, in the photograph, in 1982, at a block party 2 miles from where Maribel Stanton disappeared. And standing next to him was Carl Benedict, younger, thinner, smiling, holding a glass of lemonade. They weren't neighbours. They were old friends. The photograph lay beneath a pool of dim lamplight in Sheriff Marks' office. 2 men, 2 smiles, 2 timelines blown to hell. Marks rubbed his temples, mind reeling. Henry Duval and Carl Benedict were not strangers. They weren't just acquaintances. They had known each other for over 40 years. That photograph uncovered in a forgotten community archive by Deputy Allen proved it. Taken at a 1982 neighbourhood picnic, they stood shoulder to shoulder as comfortable as brothers. The problem was Henry had sworn on record and to his wife that he'd never set foot in Missouri before 1989. Marks whispered to the empty room, "Why lie about your past, Henry?" The forensic team confirmed the photo's authenticity. No digital manipulation, no mistaken identity. It was Henry clear as day, his arm casually draped across Carl Benedict's shoulder. That same summer a child went missing, and now her bones had been found just steps from where the 2 men used to drink beer together on quiet suburban evenings. Marks ordered Henry brought back into the interrogation room. This time no lawyers, no smoke screens. Just a photo slid across the table. "Explain this." Henry stared at it, his jaw tightening. A nerve in his cheek twitched. But he didn't touch the photo. "You said you didn't know Carl before he moved in next door," Mark said. "You said you came to Missouri in 89. But this was 7 years earlier." Henry's voice when it came was slow, distant. "I didn't lie. I forgot." Mark slammed his palm down. "You forgot knowing a man tied to 3 dead girls." Henry blinked. Then in a whisper, "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like." Henry leaned back in his chair, eyes glossy with something that was either fear or memory. "We were part of something," he said quietly. "Back then, a program for wayward kids. Carl ran it out of his house. Therapy sessions, experimental treatments. He said we were helping." Mark stilled. Helping who? Girls, abused, neglected. He said we were reconditioning them, breaking cycles. The room grew cold. "You're telling me you and Carl Benedict were part of some underground operation?" Henry nodded slowly. "It started in Chicago. After his license was revoked, we moved to Missouri, started over. We had a few volunteers at first, social workers, people who believed in the work. And Maribel Marks asked, was she a volunteer? Henry's eyes flicked up. The guilt bloomed like mould. She was a mistake. Marks froze. Henry's voice cracked. Carl said she'd been abandoned, that no one would miss her. He brought her one night after the clinic shut down, said we'd help her adjust. He gave her sleeping pills, that's all. Just pills. What happened to her? Henry's lip trembled. She had a seizure. Never woke up. A beat of silence. Marks asked, voice low, "So you buried her behind your house?" "No," Henry said. "She died in Carl's basement." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marks's breath caught. "You moved her?" Henry nodded. "I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her crying, even when she was gone. So I took her. One night I dug the spot myself, right at the edge of the pines. I needed her away from me, but not too far. I thought if I kept her close, maybe I'd never forget what we did." Mark stood slowly revolted. "You buried a child to soothe your conscience." Henry didn't argue. Meanwhile, the team was expanding their search radius. Every square foot between numbers 42 and 44 was scanned with ground-penetrating radar. And that's when they found it. A second drum. Not as deep, slightly larger, buried beneath a rotting doghouse at the very edge of Carl Benedict's property line. This time the smell was unmistakable. Decomposition. The drum was opened at the crime lab. Inside, bones, tangled clothing, decomposed flesh still clinging to places. Dental records weren't needed, because lying at the bottom of the barrel, half floating in rancid water, was a wallet. Inside, a student ID card. Emily Marie Duval. Sheriff Marks stared at it in stunned silence. It didn't make sense. They had found the sweater, the hair, the photographs, the basement. But Emily had been there, alive, for a long time. The state of her remains suggested death between 2017 and 2019, 6 years after her disappearance. Mara Duval collapsed when she was told. She was alive, she sobbed, clutching at her throat. My baby. She was alive all that time. For 6 years her daughter had been hidden just feet away, behind the fence, in a room no one knew existed. Her world shrinking to a cot and a locked door. The realisation settled like lead Emily had grown from 18 to nearly 24 inside Carl Benedict's soundproofed prison. Alive, alone, forgotten, until something no one yet knew what finally ended her. And someone had buried her there, not behind Henry's house, not at the tree line, directly beneath Carl's back porch. The autopsy came in the next day. Emily's cause of death, strangulation. Time of death fall of 2018. The hyoid bone was fractured, defensive wounds present. But there was more. The coroner found healed fractures on her wrist and clavicle. Mark stared at the report. She fought, he whispered, for years. The discovery upended everything. Emily hadn't been buried to be forgotten. She'd been silenced. And the man who silenced her was still missing. Carl Benedict. Gone, no trace. No prints in the woods, no credit card activity, no sightings. It was as if he had vanished into the very earth beneath the two houses. Then a junior tech flagged something from a case box that had sat unnoticed for days. It was a photograph, found in the same locked box as Emily's hair and ID. A snapshot. Blurry. Taken at night. A figure slumped in the background, lying on the concrete floor of the basement. Rope around his neck, eyes wide, lips purple. Carl Benedict. Dead. But the photo was dated September 21st, 2018, 2 months before Emily's estimated time of death. The room turned to ice as Sheriff Mark set the photograph on the evidence table. Carl Benedict. Slumped. Lifeless. Rope biting into the flesh of his neck. Pupils blown, wide skin drained of all colour. Death documented with precision and dated September 21st, 2018. Yet Emily Duval's autopsy was clear she died 2 months later, which meant Carl didn't kill her? Someone else did. Marks exhaled slowly, fighting the chill rising in his spine. If Carl died in September, but Emily died in November, then someone else had been in that basement after his death. And they hadn't let her go. Deputy Allen leaned in, eyes fixed on the photograph. Who took this? Marks didn't answer. He was already flipping back through the case files, pulling records, images, anything that could explain who had access to the house during that time. But no surveillance existed. No alarms were triggered. No neighbours had reported a disturbance. Still someone had been there, and they hadn't just discovered Carl dead. They documented it. Back at number 44, the forensic team was combing through the basement again, this time with a renewed purpose. Near the cot, just beneath the floorboards, they found a loose tile. Beneath it, a small cavity carved crudely into the cement. Inside was a journal. A girl's handwriting? Spidery, uncertain at first, then firmer, more defiant. Emily's journal. It spanned 6 years. Bits of paper, napkins, scraps torn from books, all filled with her voice, her fear, her fight. He says I'm not real unless he says I am. I'm supposed to smile when he watches, but I don't anymore. I think he knows I hate him. I hear footsteps sometimes, not his, heavy, slower. He talks to someone, maybe on the phone, maybe not. I can't hear what they say. Today he was gone longer than usual. I heard the door open upstairs. I thought he was back. But the steps were different. It was someone else. He said I reminded him of her. I don't know who she is, but he cried. I didn't know monsters could cry. He's getting sick. I think he's scared of dying. I hope he does. Last night someone opened the door. It wasn't Carl. I didn't see their face. They left food and a Polaroid. Mark stared at the last page dated September 22nd, 2018, the day after the photo of Carl's body was taken. So someone had come into the basement after Carl died and kept Emily alive, fed her, photographed the body, and then 2 months later killed her. A new suspect had entered the picture. Someone close enough to Carl to find the body. Someone willing to keep Emily locked up even after his death. Someone who knew the basement existed. Sheriff Marks returned to Henry Duval. But this time he wasn't alone. He brought the journal, the photograph, and Mara. She sat stiffly beside her husband, her eyes bloodshot but focused. She hadn't spoken to Henry since the arrest. She had refused, until now. She wanted the truth. The minute Henry saw the photograph of Carl's dead body, he recoiled. His reaction was real, visceral. Marks pressed in. "Did you kill him, Henry?" "No," Henry said, shaking his head. "I didn't even know he was dead." But you knew about the basement. A long silence. Then a whisper. Yes, Mara gasped. You knew. You knew our daughter was down there and you let her. Henry's face collapsed. I didn't know she was alive. The room went dead quiet. I thought she was gone, he choked. Carl told me she ran away, that she couldn't handle the program, that she left. And I believed him. I needed to believe him. Mark stared hard. But you owned that house. You paid utilities. You had keys. Henry nodded slowly. Yes, I rented it to him under the table. He said he needed privacy, that the work we started in Chicago, it wasn't over. He said Emily wanted to help. And you didn't question when she disappeared, Marks asked. I did, Henry shouted. I looked. I called. But Carl told me not to interfere, said she was in hiding, that she was scared of me. And maybe part of me believed it. Maybe part of me was scared of what she'd say. Then Marks dropped the hammer. She wrote in her journal, September 22nd, the day after Carl died. She wrote that someone new had come in, left food, took a picture, didn't show their face. Henry's eyes widened. No, he whispered, not me, I swear. Mara, trembling, asked the question no one else dared to. Then who was it? Henry shook his head slowly. I don't know, but he looked haunted. I thought I buried my sins. I thought, if I kept quiet, I could protect you both. But someone else kept that house alive. Someone else had a key. Then he looked up, his voice hollow. It wasn't just us in the program, Mara. Marks went cold. How many were there? Henry paused. 3. The third man's name was buried in the same 1980s clinic records Gerald Nash, social worker. No criminal record, no digital footprint after 1991. Disappeared after the clinic was shut down. Deputy Allen tracked down a marriage license filed in Kansas under the name Gerald Norris issued in 1996. Same birthday, same face. Same man, still alive, still in Missouri, living just 20 minutes away. Mark stared out the window of the cruiser as they pulled up to a modest blue-painted ranch house off Old Cider Mill Road. There was a hummingbird feeder on the porch, a child's swing hanging from the tree. They knocked. A man answered. Tall, late 60s, calm eyes. Can I help you, Sheriff? Marks held out the photo of Carl Benedict's corpse. The man didn't flinch, just blinked, then said, well, looks like he finally did it. Did what Marks asked. Offed himself. He always said he would. Marks stared at him. You haven't seen that photo before? Gerald Nash shook his head. No, but I'm not surprised. Marks narrowed his eyes. Funny, because that photo was taken after Carl died. From inside his basement, where your program kept a young woman locked for 6 years. Gerald paused. Something flickered behind his eyes. Then he said softly, You're wrong, Sheriff. His voice dropped to a whisper. Emily wasn't the only one down there. Gerald Nash's words hung in the air like a cold fog. Emily wasn't the only one down there. Sheriff Marks felt the room tilt. He exchanged a glance with Mara, whose eyes were wide and haunted fingers clenched tightly on the edge of the worn wooden table. What do you mean? Marks asked, voice low but firm. Nash's gaze flickered eyes searching the ceiling as if pulling fragments of memory from some dark abyss. There were others. Girls. Young ones. Broken ones. We thought we were saving them. Protecting them. But it was a cage. And the cage grew over time. Mark stared, waiting for him to explain. I left the program years ago, Nash said, voice trembling slightly. I thought I was free, but the past, it never leaves, especially when you bury the truth. He gestured vaguely at the files on the desk. Maribel, Emily, the third girl, she was named Anna. Marks's breath caught. No one knew about Anna. She was a ghost, Nash said, almost whispering. Carl's favourite project. The one he claimed would prove we could heal broken minds. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. Another girl. Another child. Nash nodded slowly. She was there before Emily, before Maribel, a long time ago. Marks pressed him. Where is she now? Nash's eyes darkened. Dead. But not here. Not in those yards. The search shifted abruptly. The investigators went back to the original clinic records from Chicago. They found an old storage locker rented under Nash's alias Gerald Norris. Deputies pried the rusted door open. Inside, amidst decades of dust, lay binders, faded journals, medical notes, records of the program's patients. Pages upon pages of names, ages, dates. And a map. The map marked locations across Missouri, isolated spots, wooded areas, abandoned properties. One spot was circled repeatedly in red. The farm. A small, dilapidated farmstead 50 miles north. The next morning the team drove out to the farm. Broken fences, overgrown weeds, an old barn sagging at the edges. Inside the barn a false floor covered a pit. They lowered ropes. The pit was a crypt. Years of human bones lay stacked inside. The forensic team worked quickly, and then amid the bones they found a box, a child's shoe, a locket, a tattered doll with one glass eye missing. The DNA test confirmed the worst. Anna, back in town, Mara sat in the sheriff's office numb. She whispered to Marks, "My daughter's bones weren't buried in our backyard." But all these years Henry was hiding something darker, a secret so twisted he couldn't even admit it. Marks nodded grimly. This was never just about Emily. It was about a network, a program that preyed on children, destroyed families, and buried its sins in backyards and forgotten farms. Suddenly the phone rang. Deputy Allen answered and turned pale. Marks took the phone. "Sheriff, you need to get to number 44, now." Arriving at the house, Marks found the front door ajar. Inside the darkness pressed heavy. No sign of recent visitors, no footprints. But then from the basement a faint sound, a whisper, a soft sobbing. Marks motioned for his team and moved down the stairs. In the cold basement beneath the cot was a narrow crawl space. Inside it, shaking, was a young woman, her eyes wide sunken, clothes ragged. She looked up, voice barely audible. "Help me." They brought her into the light. She was Emily. Alive! The Emily who had been believed dead, whose bones were found beneath the porch. This Emily was thin, fragile, but very much breathing. When Mara rushed forward, tears streaming, Emily reached out. "I was trapped," she whispered. "Carl was gone, but the others, they kept me. Gerald, the farm, they lied. I escaped when they fought." Mark stared at the woman who had spent nearly a decade in darkness. Who fought? Emily's eyes flickered with a haunted spark. Gerald and Henry. Outside the storm was gathering. Lightning cracked. The truth was unravelling. And beneath the wrong backyard, the secrets of decades were just beginning to surface. Emily's voice trembled, yet held a fragile strength as she sat wrapped in a worn blanket at the sheriff's office. Her fingers shaking traced invisible patterns on the table. The room was suffused with a heavy silence, everyone too stunned to speak. "I don't know how long I was trapped in that crawl space," she said quietly, eyes staring past the window. It was a narrow hole just big enough to sit. Carl was gone, but Henry and Gerald, they kept me there. Sheriff Marks's brow furrowed. "Henry, Gerald, you said they fought." Emily nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "At first they worked together, the program. But Henry, he changed. He wanted out. Said we shouldn't hurt any more kids. And Gerald, Mara asked, voice cracking. He wanted to keep control. Said the program was his life's work. He didn't care about us. Only the results." Emily's lips trembled. "One night, after a fight, Henry locked Gerald out of the house. I heard shouting, then a struggle." Marks pressed. "What happened next?" Emily swallowed. "Henry tried to kill Gerald, said it was for all of us, but Gerald fought back. Carl was already dead. So was Hope." Her gaze dropped. The fight ended with Gerald leaving. He went to the farm. The room fell heavier. Mara whispered the farm, where Anna was found. Emily's eyes flicked up. "Yes, Gerald buried her there. He kept proof of all his work." Marks's voice was cold. "And Henry," Emily's voice faltered. "He stayed, took care of me, tried to protect me, but the guilt ate him alive." Meanwhile, Detective Allen found something chilling in the data logs from the farm. A series of encrypted emails sent between 2010 and 2018, sent from an address registered to Henry Duval, to an unknown recipient. Code words, references to patients, sessions, and final phase. Marks decoded one message dated July 2017. Emily's progress is unstable. Recommend increased confinement. Subject shows signs of resistance. A second message, September 2018. Carl deceased. Initiate transfer protocol awaiting Gerald's confirmation. The timeline fit perfectly. Carl died in September 2018. Emily was transferred, and then silence. The news hit the town like a storm. Henry Duval and Gerald Nash were both suspects in a horrifying conspiracy. But only one had stayed in the house. Only one had been seen after 2018. Mara's broken voice on the evening news shattered what little calm remained. "My husband tried to protect her, but he was trapped too. We all were." A break came unexpectedly. A call from a rural gas station outside town. A man matching Gerald Nash's description was seen buying supplies. He had a limp. He wore a baseball cap pulled low. Deputies fanned out. They found his car abandoned by a creek. Inside a notebook, filled with desperate scribbles. A final confession. It read, "They think I'm the villain, but the real monster was the silence, the lies. We all played our part. Carl's death didn't end it. Henry's guilt was a prison. Emily escaped me once. She won't escape forever. If you find this look deeper, the program was bigger. It still is." 2 miles from the gas station, in a secluded cabin, deputies found Nash. He sat in the dark eyes hollow. When confronted, he simply smiled. "Did you find her?" Marks's voice was low. "Yes, she's safe," Nash laughed. "Safe you don't understand. It's never safe, not with them watching." That night, Mara sat beside Emily in a hospital room. Emily's whispered confession broke the final dam. "I think there are more of us," she said. "Girls trapped in places no one knows about. Hidden behind backyards. Behind doors no one dares open." Mara held her hand tight. "Not anymore." Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees. A chilling reminder some secrets refused to stay buried. And the wrong backyard wasn't just a mistake. It was a doorway, a beginning, a warning. The hospital room was dim, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. Mara sat clutching Emily's hand, each breath between them heavy with unspoken grief and cautious hope. Outside, the shadows lengthened and the quiet hum of the medical machines filled the space with a hollow rhythm. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. I remember snippets. Faces in the dark, whispers in the walls. Sometimes they'd come to the house, sometimes to the farm. They always wore masks. Not literal ones, but the kind that hid what they really were. People who should have protected us, but instead they hunted us. Sheriff Marks stood near the doorway, the weight of her words sinking into his bones. He thought about the scope of the case, the 3 missing girls, the buried secrets, the sinister network that stretched farther than he'd ever imagined. Then Mara, tears glistening in her eyes, broke the silence. "Emily? Is there anyone else? Anyone still out there?" Emily's eyes darkened. "I don't know how many, but I remember names. People who came to the farm. People who owned businesses, wore suits, smiled in church pews." Marks exchanged a glance with Deputy Allen, whose jaw was clenched tight. "We have to find them," Marks said quietly. The investigation broadened rapidly. Using Nash's encrypted emails and Emily's scattered recollections, the sheriff's office began tracking down those who had once worked with or supported the program. Names surfaced, some well-known in the community, others shadowy figures with minimal records. Several suspects were arrested over the following weeks, their luxurious homes raided for evidence, documents, photos, videotapes. Each discovery painted a deeper, darker picture of a conspiracy that had preyed on the vulnerable for decades. One chilling breakthrough came from a video found on a hidden drive in Nash's abandoned car. It was grainy footage showing a meeting in a dimly lit room. Men and women sat around a table. They spoke in hushed tones about controlling the narrative, ensuring silence and maintaining discretion. One man's face stood out, the town's former mayor, a man who had long been praised for his civic work. Sheriff Marks watched the tape with growing fury. "This goes all the way to the top," he muttered. Meanwhile, Mara struggled to rebuild her fractured life. Every day was a battle against memories that clawed at her sanity. She confided to Emily one night. "I kept telling myself Henry loved us. Maybe he did. But love can be twisted by fear and guilt." Emily squeezed her hand. "We survived." Then came the letter, delivered in a plain envelope to the sheriff's office. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single chilling sentence. "You've only just begun to dig." The wrong backyard was a warning. The truth lies beneath the old mill. The old mill, a crumbling relic on the outskirts of town long since closed. Marks knew it well. Stories of strange noises, unexplained lights. A place local kids dared not venture. That night Marks led a team to the mill. The air was thick with decay and rust. Inside, shadows clung to every beam. They searched room after room. Then beneath the floorboards, Deputy Allen found a trapdoor. They pried it open. Below, a tunnel stretched into darkness. The scent of damp earth and old secrets filled their nostrils. With flashlights piercing the black, they descended. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Walls lined with cages, empty, but chains and shackles still hung, and walls scrawled with names. Names of girls, names of victims. And there in the centre, a makeshift altar. Candles burned low. A fresh set of footprints led to a small box. Inside, a recorder. It clicked on. Emily's voice played. "Help me, they're still here." Suddenly, a noise behind them. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The past wasn't finished with Cypress Lane. The footsteps echoed off the cold stone walls of the underground chamber. Sheriff Marks froze, every muscle tense. Deputy Allen reached instinctively for his flashlight, sweeping the beam toward the source of the sound. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman mid-30s, her face pale and eyes wild, clutching a rusted keychain heavy with dozens of keys. She stumbled forward, voice cracking. "I'm the last one." Mark stepped forward slowly. Last one of what? She swallowed hard. The program, the experiment, the ones they forgot or didn't want to remember. I was kept here for years. They called me Subject 23, but I'm not a number. I'm Suddenly the woman's words cut off as a thud resounded from deeper within the tunnel. The team tensed, guns drawn. "Someone else is down here," Mark said grimly. They followed the sound deeper into the labyrinth of stone and rusted metal. As they rounded a corner, a figure collapsed onto the floor, a man gaunt and bleeding a bullet wound in his side. It was Gerald Nash. Bloodied but defiant, Nash smiled weakly. "You think this ends with me? The program lives on." Marks cuffed him roughly. "You're done." Nash's grin faded. "I've told you everything I know, but there's more. They're watching. They always watch." Meanwhile, the woman, Subject 23, collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "I escaped months ago," she said. "I've been hiding, trying to warn others, but I'm tired. So tired." Back at the station, the confession tapes Nash had recorded were analysed. They revealed a chilling truth. The network spanning multiple states with powerful people protecting the operation. The program wasn't just a suburban horror story. It was an empire built on fear and silence. Mara and Emily attended the hearing where Henry's charges were formally elevated from accessory to kidnapping and manslaughter to conspiracy to murder. Henry's broken admissions painted a portrait of a man trapped between guilt and denial. Emily's presence was both a beacon of hope and a scarred reminder of survival. One evening, Marks received a call from Subject 23. She had information about a hidden safe deposit box in Henry's name. Inside were records, names, dates, payments, and something else, a ledger with a series of codes and addresses. The team decrypted the ledger and found links to properties across the Midwest. The conspiracy was far from over. In the final moments of Part 9, Mara and Emily visited the newly discovered gravesite of Anna at the old farm. Mara knelt, tears falling into the cold soil. Emily placed a hand over hers, whispering, "We have to make sure their voices aren't lost." Behind them, the wind picked up, carrying with it a quiet promise. Justice was coming, but so was the reckoning. The courtroom was packed. Silence draped over the room like a heavy shroud as the final verdict loomed. The years of horror lies and buried secrets had culminated here, justice's slow and bitter reckoning. Henry Duval sat gaunt and fragile, eyes sunken but clear. Mara and Emily exchanged a glance, worn-scarred yet unbroken. This was the moment they had fought for the hope that truth would finally crack the silence. The prosecutor laid out the case, a network of abuse hidden beneath suburban normalcy, a decades-long conspiracy, and the unthinkable suffering of children whose names had been erased from history. Henry's guilt was undeniable, but his frailty evoked a strange sympathy. In his confession, he had admitted to sins both monstrous and human, a man trapped by fear, love, and denial. Gerald Nash faced trial in a different county, charged with kidnapping, abuse, and multiple counts of murder. Subject 23's testimony had been pivotal, exposing the wider conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, Mara and Emily stood together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Mara's voice was steady. "We're not just closing a chapter, we're opening a door, for those who suffered, for those still trapped in silence." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with a fragile light. "The program's victims deserve more than forgotten graves. They deserve stories. They deserve healing." In the months that followed, the investigation expanded beyond Cypress Lane. More victims came forward. More conspirators were arrested. The network, once invisible, was unravelling thread by thread. A foundation was established in Emily's name, dedicated to supporting survivors of abuse and trafficking, shining light into the darkest corners. One crisp autumn evening, Mara and Emily walked together along Cypress Lane, past the two houses where the nightmare had begun. Neighbours waved a tentative warmth in their smiles. Mara took Emily's hand. "It's quiet now, but never forget how loud our voices can be." Emily squeezed her mother's hand. "We survived the wrong backyard." And in that moment, beneath the swaying pine trees, hope grew.